Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May Education Affairs Committee meeting. We have two great presentations tonight. Dr. Sandberg is going to talk about the special education plan, and Mr. Benzing, our K-8 math resources. So welcome, everyone. Before we start, we're going to do roll call. So Ms. Wachowski-Smith.
Present.
Ms. Dolay.
Here.
Ms. Whitsett.
Here.
Mr. Henry.
Here.
And members of the board, Ms. Holbert.
Here.
Ms. Walkman. Thank you. Now can we have approval of the April minutes? Those are in front of you.
So moved.
Thank you. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, so as we said, we have two great presentations tonight. Dr. Sandberg, we are our first presenter, so he's going to talk about the special education plan. It's our mission and vision and the role we commit.
So thank you, member of the board, for having me. I'm looking forward to talking to you about the work that occurred this year as we in the Department of Student Services really plan out the next several years with respect to serving our students with exceptionalities and specifically special education. I want to draw directly from the statute. And I'm not going to read this verbatim, but this is really speaking to the statute in the PA school code about the triennial or the requirement for a triennial special education plan. So this is really mandatory work, right? This is it's going to feed into more work that you will be hearing about that I know Dr. Conley's office is leading with respect to the comprehensive plan. This is, as of, I think 3 years ago, the state really moved towards the FRCP, another acronym for you, the Future Ready Comprehensive Plan. It really is, it's drawing the numbers from the data that we submit to the state anyway. So it actually makes it a far more seamless process. So this is just really a screenshot of the FRCP for your viewing. If you have really good eyesight, you can see on the left column the requirements, which I'm going to go into in some detail tonight. And here they are. So even if you have mediocre eyesight, you can see them. I've bolded a few of them, and I want to draw your attention to those, which I will speak to in some specificity. Those that are really not bolded, I just want to point out for you, as well as members of the community, that they're really non-discretionary. Most of these sections of a special education plan are bureaucratic, right? This is unlike the work on the strategic plan. This is less aspirational and more of a functional document that is required for us to submit to the state. We go here at Wallingford-Swarthmore School District out of our way to make this as aspirational as possible. The areas that really do have a fair amount of latitude where we can really, move the needle are those that I've bolded. Those that are not bolded, I'll say like the identification method. These are really, psychologists have kind of one of two ways to identify a student for having a disability and therefore qualifying for special education. 99.9% of them use what we use, which is the discrepancy model, where we're really looking at that comparison between aptitude and achievement. The state has sort of over the years, for those who are interested, revived and then kind of disbanded from their efforts to use RTI as a means for identification. And there's a lot that's kind of problematic and controversial about that. Not at all what I'm going to get into tonight. Non-resident oversight, incarcerated student oversight. These are really how the code applies to school districts that might house a facility. We would refer to that as like a 1306 of the Pennsylvania School Code. So if we had a residential facility within the 6 square miles of this district, we would actually be obligated to provide special education services to students who qualify within that, even though they're not residents. So we have very little ability to really influence it. We don't have those facilities, which is why they're certainly not in bold. Where we do have some influence, a great deal, I might add, is the least restrictive environment. Excuse me for butchering that. The extent to which we take students with disabilities and are including them in heterogeneous classes. Positive behavior supports. We have made great headway in terms of our efforts with respect to PBIS. And then special education personnel development, what kind of professional development opportunities that we are offering. This is not directly towards just special education teachers, but all related service providers, and probably more importantly, the broader general education teacher population and how they are receiving students with disabilities in their classes. So by way of background, our last triennial special education plan was submitted in spring of 2022, which may occur to you was only 2 years ago. And that was actually originally due in 2021. It was extended 1 year due to the pandemic. I was onboarding right as that was coming due. The good news about that is it really coincided with a cyclical monitoring period, which occurs about every 6 years. It occurs exactly every 6 years, excuse me, from the state, where we're getting needs that the state is really identifying by doing a random audit. It's not strictly speaking an audit like you would think of like with the IRS. It's truly every 6 years that we are kind of going through the books, doing interviews, so on and so forth. It also coincided with work on the strategic plan, which it was really coming from several audits, and gave us kind of very much richer data. What I would say is because we've only had 2 years, the needs are not incredibly different than they were in 2022. Those needs from the work on the strategic plan and cyclical monitoring are really in bold for you here. They are 3. Participation rates among students with disabilities in the PSSA and Keystone testing, graduation rates of students with disabilities, and least restrictive environment. Let me spend a minute just going over each one of these. They're in a specific order for you. What I would say is that we have great influence over some of these. We have less influence over others. By way of example, the participation rates of students with disabilities in PSSA and Keystone testing. This is in all likelihood, especially during the COVID period, a reflection of the extent to which parents may choose to opt their children out from standardized testing. I would also say that this is one area where there is universal concern, both from parents and administrators and teachers, certainly about putting a student who has a disability in front of a PSSA that has minimal or no modifications to it. Gone are the days we used to, those of us who are old enough to remember, they used to have something called a modified PSSA, which was nice while it lasted. And then you may be familiar with something called a PASA, which is truly for our most impaired student population. We, by law, are not to exceed 1% of our students with disabilities who can participate in that. So it is a very small group of students who really are taking that assessment. So we have some control over that, but I would argue little. When we talk about graduation rates of students with disabilities, this is kind of a mixed bag. The way the state codes this, interestingly, is that any student who stays beyond their 4-year cohort with an IEP is considered and coded as a dropout. I did not come up with that rule, that's the state. And what I would say is more and more of our students with disabilities are actually staying beyond their 4-year cohort. You had heard me earlier in the year talk about sort of the increase in the age of majority. So students are more typically now, or often, our most impaired students are actually staying until the last day before they turn 22, which is considerably more than they used to. So I would argue that that is not the whole story, right? So part of the story is that we do have work to do in terms of increasing the engagement of those students who are most difficult to engage, right? And those students are, not surprisingly, often identified as eligible for special education. So we have a lot of work to do there. It's a mixed bag, like I said. The third, I would say we have a lot of influence on, and this is the extent to which we're able to provide FAPE, free and appropriate public education to students in the least restrictive environment. So this really speaks to what are the specially designed instruction that our teachers are equipped with enforcing and putting into place so that our students don't have to be pulled out of a general education class, whatever it is, at whatever level, and receive replacement instruction. Now, I'm going to caution you and say this is sort of a mixed bag too. My department is notorious, as my colleagues up here can tell you, for we will take whatever question you have for us, and we'll always give you the same answer, and that is, well, that depends, right? So some people might find that less than helpful at times, which is partly true. when it comes to least restrictive environment, let me just put it this way before I move on. We have requirements where we have to provide evidence-based interventions. Sometimes those interventions can occur in the general education setting. Sometimes it is not feasible. So when we are talking about Wilson instruction, right, a proprietary program that's really targeting science of reading for students who have comprehension issues, in an elementary level, that is very plausible that that might occur in the general education environment. If you are a high school student, where we are no longer learning to read, typically, our typical students are no longer learning to read, but more often, reading to learn, so to speak, the chances of Wilson instruction occurring in a general education population is very low. So that's kind of one of those things where it really depends on what level and what the disability type is. So we do, though, prioritize LRE, least restrictive environment, highly, and we are collecting a lot of data on that. This year, and just in terms of how we kind of roll this out, what you would find in many districts, not to show off here a little too much, I'm going to anyway, though, you will find that other districts are having one meeting, and they may have a school board member. In this case, I'm going to defer to Ms. Williams, who's not here, but she was our representative, maybe one parent, one special education teacher, one administrator, and one general ed teacher, right? We really try to make this as accessible as possible and to get various stakeholders at the table. We had 4 meetings, I'm including tonight as our presentation to you, at the final one. We began this, though, really with an introduction that was open to all in February, and then in March, we moved to a parent focus group. Some of those parents are here, and I thank you for being here to support me. And then in April, we also had a staff focus group. And then again, we are here this evening to go over some of the work we've done. Our steering committee, again, while other districts are probably fulfilling the required individuals who are bolded here for you, we really sought to do a little bit more and to ensure that we had a variety of stakeholders. Easier said than done. I think one of the important things for us to do is to get parents, particularly of students with disabilities, who are in neighborhood schools, but sometimes in out-of-district placements, right? Also from each of the schools, if possible. Also, there are 13 different disability categories identified. So it's important that we are not just drawing on 1 or 2, but we're really trying to have a collective of parents who really represent a wider range of disability categories. Special education teachers from each building were involved. General education teachers, some of whom are also community members, which was very interesting, from each building. Related service providers, these are speech language pathologists, psychologists, occupational therapists, so on and so forth, administrators. And as I mentioned, Ms. Williams was happy to help, I hope, with us as well. And she was at all of the meetings leading up to tonight. We were also really fortunate to work in tandem with Mr. Joshua McNeil, who's provided some consultation with us this year. He, I think, was here about 2 weeks ago doing a during Reading Olympics. Was that last week or 2 weeks ago? Dr. Do you remember? Last week?
No, it was 2 weeks ago during the week of Reading Olympics.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago. I guess my days are kind of blending into one another. I apologize. So he was here to, and some of the people on his team are have a background as inclusion specialists. So you can probably correctly deduce that lends itself very nicely to the work we have to do in promoting a least restrictive environment, is how are we better including students. In terms of just the bare basics, the profile and plan essentials, I'm the director of special education. Dr. Marseille is the chief school administrator. The total number of students receiving special education as of December 1, I want to add, was 561. Among a total district enrollment of 3,737, makes for a special education percentage of 15%. My office looks at 10 years of data at any given point. So this is, while we're really planning on what will the next several years look like, I want to look at trends in my office of always kind of collecting this sort of 10-year snapshot. So when we get to the next year, we sort of eliminate the 11th year, if that makes sense. In front of you, and I don't know if the audience requires them. I want to make sure that you get them. I know all audience members have seen this. This is a public document. This is publicly accessible. We use this data to really populate our analyses across 10 years. What I want to draw your attention to for this slide is we are a district that's fairly static in numbers. Our range across one decade is approximately 100 students. There are a number of ways that we can sort of slice and dice that data, and I'm happy to get into a little bit. But by and large, we have no farm fields here that are about to be developed or were developed 5 years ago, in which you would see a dramatic spike in numbers. But we are relatively static. We're in the most recent data report, which mind you is from the 22-23 school year. Last year, these come out about 8 to 9 months late. We were at 553 students with IEPs. Before I get into this next slide, what I would like to say is one of my responsibilities this year was to fold this work into the broader work around developing cultural proficiency in this district. So I was really excited in March to present to the staff or to introduce our keynote, Mr. McNeil, whose slide you saw earlier. One of the arguments that I wanted to make in that introduction was why this work really is a matter of cultural proficiency. As a white man talking about this, it gives me some pause that I have any expertise to land in this conversation around why we need to be more culturally proficient as a district. What I would say is that my understanding as sort of an amateur in this work is that all cultural proficiency work is really about identifying how the way in which I was brought up is very different than how others were brought up. The experiences that I arrive at this work with are different than those of everyone else. And that really is at the heart of this cultural proficiency work. And it just so happens to be at the heart of what we do in the Office of Student Services, where we're really trying to empower our colleagues, be they special educators or general educators, to receive students where they are at. And they are at very different places. And that's really where we kind of get that term differentiation. How are we differentiating our instruction? For those who are less convinced by that interpretation of cultural proficiency, I find that okay. The reason, if you are more identitarian and you have more comfort in coming at the work of cultural proficiency when looking at it through a sort of a racial lens, talking about those issues, that's okay, because it just so happens some of the work we have to do with respect to identifying students, this is work our district has to do, this is work that the Commonwealth has to do, is the fact that we tend to over-identify along racial lines. So if you look at our district, 6.6% of our student population is African American or Black. More than double that is comprises students with IEPs, meaning you are more than twice as likely to be identified as a student with a disability qualifying for special education if you are African American Black. On the other hand, and remember I go back to everything sort of depends, right? There's sort of two sides to each issue at least. 8.5% of our student population is Asian. We are under-identifying that student population for IEPs. So we can look at this sort of two ways. We can look at this as an over-identification issue, which I think is sort of obvious. We can also look at this as what we refer to as a child find obligation. Like, are we actually discharging our obligation to identify those students with disabilities correctly and enough? The only population, I might add, that is reasonably proportionate in our identification rates are that of the majority, white students. I want to also draw your attention to 10 years of data where I am comparing our district to that of sort of the collective of the state, as well as a sibling district, that sibling district is sort of defined by similar demographics, similar locations, similar overall population in that district, and sort of how we sort of fare. So this first category, I'm going to get into a little bit here of least restrictive environment, right? So this is special education inside, and they use the term regular class. I prefer general education, just to be clear, but this is their terminology, more than 80% of the day. So just to be clear, we are blue. The state is, or excuse me, the sibling district is red, and the state is, I guess I'd call that yellow. So what you really want to see, just simply put, is this to be as high as possible, right? This is what we refer to as itinerant students who are included for 80% or more of the day. So, we have made some progress in the last 2 years, we do remain behind the state and behind our sibling district. Conversely, it depends, right? I get back to this. Conversely, this is a category of special education in other settings. This is the number, this is the need to send students to a school or a setting or a program that is not their neighborhood school, right? These are more typically are far more impaired students. That's why the percentage is relatively low. The scale of the y-axis there only goes to 10%. We have been recognized by the state as doing pretty well. We are including students, keeping them in their neighborhood schools as much as possible. And where this gets kind of fuzzy is these having more students in their neighborhood schools who are the most impaired students would generate worse numbers on this graph, right? Because they're not likely to be itinerant students. They're likely to be in a special education class very often. So we have made significant progress in a just to give the most simple explanation here. You want to see this number go as low as possible. In theory, that if you had it at 0, it would mean that we send no students anywhere. And we are in fact doing better than our sibling district on this measure, and we are in fact doing better than the state average. So with that data, I just want to outline the initiatives of my department and certainly my side of the department with respect to special education. I do my best to use the words around this very carefully. So you may have noticed that I prefer not to say regular education, because that sort of implies that special education is irregular or abnormal. See the Young Frankenstein reference there. When we are going into our initiatives, I also try to say we're not using proven, right? In sort of social science and science, we kind of try to stay away from that, right? We prefer the term evidence-based. Number one, we want to provide evidence-based and meaningful interventions to students with exceptionalities in the least restrictive environment. Every year, I get to talk to our new teachers, our inductees. They are a heterogeneous group. Sometimes they're a special education teacher. Sometimes they're related service folks in there. Most of them are general education teachers. And I like to start with asking, what do you think special education is? Like, can you give me a working definition? Let's workshop this. And usually after like 45 minutes, we sort of come up with like, these are proven, and I go into my whole spiel like I just gave you. Well, we try to stay away from proven. We say evidence-based, and like, oh, great, got it. These are evidence-based strategies. Yes, like this is a victory. And then usually someone comes out with like, so does that mean like we wouldn't use evidence-based interventions for like general ed? And it's a great question, right? That's kind of the point of the exercise is like, are evidence-based interventions really only reserved for students with disabilities? They're clearly not. Number two, I'll get back to that. We want to instill a data-rich culture whereby student programming really relies on the use of, here I've done it, proven strategies that can be measured reliably, right? So that probably ought to say evidence-based, right? 3, foster and promote a community that embraces neurodiversity. 4, support universal and targeted teaching practices that promote equitable outcomes for all students. So I think part of the exercise that I was giving you a little bit of a snapshot into is really this. What is good in special education is good for general education, right? Evidence-based interventions are not reserved for students with disabilities. In fact, the more we employ evidence-based interventions in the general education environment, the more we actually reduce the burden of identifying students whose needs are not otherwise met, if that makes sense. We want as a district to be a data-rich district and make our decisions based on having a wealth of data for general education students as well. We want to foster and promote a community that embraces neurodiversity, not as some subset of the community, but as sort of a way that we do business here. These students are our students. They are sort of at the pillar of our community. And they're not worthy of a celebration once per year, but rather a part of your English class. If you're a neurotypical student, your social studies class, so on and so forth. And then really that last piece, that supporting universal and targeted teaching practices, kind of gets at what I was saying, which is, what we want to try to do, and this is pretty lofty, is to what extent can we make putting interventions into place for students timely and irrespective of whether they have a document that says they're legally entitled? So if someone is struggling, do we need to refer them to a multidisciplinary evaluation team and then wait the 60 days that we have to evaluate them? Or can we put in a tier 2, a targeted approach, such as check in, check out, or a homework club, or something where we can actually see, like, oh, is this helping? And a positive story to that is if we can do those things in a more timely manner, it may mean that we don't identify every student as being eligible, right? So I usually use a very bad graphic. It looks kind of like a martini olive, where you've got one circle and then there's a concentric circle, right? And the smaller circle inside says, you guys have seen it, says special education, and the bigger circle says general education. And that's my attempt to really suggest that special education is really only as big as general education is small. So that is to say, if we have a general education system, this is every student, right? And it's inflexible, and we're not able to sort of adjust standards for anyone, it means that many more students' needs cannot be met. And it means we refer those students because we have an obligation to do so under Child Fund. When we met with the community, we really took some of these loftier questions and I tried to distill them for you tonight. What does it mean for a student to graduate from WSSD? How do we measure the success of our programming? And how do we meaningfully engage with our students and minimize segregation? I am using that word purposefully. When you pull students out, whether needed or not, and they are in a class receiving instruction where everyone in that class has an IEP, it's by definition a segregated setting. I just want to be clear that it's a purposeful use of that word. So I wanted to give you just sort of the highlights. This is not the whole thing. But in terms of what our community really said loud and clear, were a couple of things. This is a district with high standards, and that really plays into that previous slide that I talked a little bit about, which is that we have very, very high standards. What does that mean for a student who has a specific learning disability? In relation to their neurotypical peers somewhere else where the standards are lower, perhaps, they may not look as impaired as they might here. Something to think about. There is enrichment sort of as a matter of how we do business everywhere here. Well-rounded students, I heard a lot, and I put that last piece, cachet, in. I thought that was very interesting that we had a number of community members really talk about this idea of when you go in an interview and you're in San Diego and somebody is from Delaware County and you say, I'm a graduate of Wallingford-Swarthmore, they know that has some name recognition to it. I thought it was kind of fascinating as a non-native to this district. How do we measure the success of our programming? Not one size fits all, was people said that loud and clear. How do we meaningfully engage with our students and minimize segregation? Really a strong desire and need to collaborate among broader groups of stakeholders, including parents prioritizing neurodiversity within buildings. Going back to that, how are we celebrating neurodiversity in an authentic way so that it's just a matter of how we do business every day? When we worked with staff, I want to say that these categories that are bolded and underlined are predetermined by the state. So we sort of have to operate within those. And I'll read them to you. I know the font is small. They're autism, positive behavior supports, paraprofessional staff, transition, science of reading, parent training, and IEP development. With respect to working with students on the spectrum, we heard a lot of a call for more targeted collaboration between specialists and generalists around pragmatics, that's to say social skills, teaching social skills, universal behavioral strategies. How are we using a common language, which really we touch a little bit upon when we talk about positive behavior supports. And then how do we more effectively, students who are on the spectrum are more apt to have issues when we transition. We talk about transition in a number of ways, transition between classes, you could say, in a secondary environment, but also like, how are we transitioning between buildings? And we've done a lot of work just in the last year. How are we receiving elementary students into the middle school? And it's a big jump for any student, and particularly a student with autism. Positive behavior supports. developing positive behavior support plans from a functional behavior assessment, more professional development just on child development milestones. Again, this hits back at what it means to be a district with high standards. Do we always have our eye as a community, as professionals, on what's the appropriate milestone that this 8-year-old should have for being an individual who's 8 years old, let alone, and sometimes we sort of up the ante and have very, very high expectations for what we should expect from children. Paraprofessional staff, again, getting back to that common language. How are our paraprofessional staff really meeting kids? Are they using the same language that our professional staff learn through professional development? How are we de-escalating students? Implementation of fading goals. I can explain that a little bit. So a fading goal would be if a student has a paraprofessional staff, our goal is always to work towards independence, so that they don't always have to have that specially designed instruction or that related service. So how are the staff, knowing that I'm assigned to this child, but I'm purposely backing off, right, in a strategic way, taking guidance from the board certified behavior analyst on what's the appropriate way to do that. And I use data, right? Because that's what we are striving to do, be a more data-rich professional organization. Paraprofessional staff are also asking for professional development on the curricula that we are using, so that they can implement it and generalize it as well. Transition, just to be clear, I know we use transition rather interchangeably. This is specifically around transition for students who are 14 or older, and the I is really for what are they doing after school. So, there was a strong mention about facilities, and I know this is something that is on your radar. If not, I have a picture for you to remind you. But how are we, how are we explicitly helping students who really need to know how to cook, right? Like, this is something that's not an elective for those students, but something that they need to know as part of their transition plan, how to do, and how do we share in a more equitable manner the facilities at the high school specifically, because that's where this age group typically is, and writing those transition specific goals, addressing transition in younger students. How do we begin this conversation earlier? We typically start it very general. And if your child is turning 14, we might give them an interest inventory to sort of find out what they're sort of interested in. But how do we really have that conversation so that we have realistic conversations with families about what the plans are for students post-school? Science of reading, how are we employing the strategies in the general ed environment at an elementary age with fidelity? And then when we do have replacement instruction, what are those alternative curricula? How do we differentiate, which curricula we might want to use, whether it be Wilson or Foundations or what have you? What are the sort of clear criteria that we would say this child's WIST score qualifies them for this intervention, so on and so forth. Again, we saw that carryover between grades. We want to really divest from being a system where we say, oh, well, the elementary thought you needed Wilson, but this is the middle school. We don't do that anymore. Like, that's not what we want to do as a system. Parent training. This is from the staff, just to be clear. Supporting executive functioning at home. Promoting consistency across environments. So when we have developed a really good positive behavior support plan at school that we think works, how do we empower parents better than we are so that they're able to generalize some of those skills with fidelity in the home where it could help them? Helping parents better understand developmental milestones. Again, we get back to this in a community with high standards. Keeping our eye on what is sort of an appropriate amount, what's an appropriate expectation for a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old, maybe a 6-year-old who is in half-day kindergarten versus a 6-year-old who is in full-day kindergarten, and how we might sort of parse that out. Finally, IEP development. How do we again streamline specially designed instruction so that they are accessible and understandable? We often hear feedback, particularly among general ed teachers, who say, like, I have got 8 kids in my class of 25 with IEPs, and each one of them has SDI, specially designed instruction, that's 12 plus pages. How am I supposed to say that? How am I supposed to, like, with fidelity, implement all of that? That is a huge burden, and it's true. So I think part of that is, what are the things that we put into specially designed instruction, which is a guarantee that we do for any student. And how do we maybe get that out so we can make sure that we are really drilling down on the things that are absolutely important and specific to that child. An appropriate goal writing, excuse me. In closing, and I am closing, I promise. I think the feedback that we heard during this process is this is a community, this is a district that really punches above its weight. Up in the corner and the center picture where you see outdoor, that's our west playground. It's mulched, right? Mulch is in this fashion, as you currently see it, is ADA compliant, right? This means that playground is accessible. Right, we are allowing students with physical impairment to access that playground. Right, to the left, you would have to have amazing eyesight to see even on the screen. That is our life skills classroom at the high school. In the back corner there, you see some sort of like easy chairs or like more comfy chairs. You'll see a recreational area that's not very big. And we are teaching recreational skills. Hey, let's do a social story, right? You were at a birthday party this weekend. You talked to these are high school students, mind you. Talk to a girl, a boy, whatever, right? Like, how do you talk me through that process? We're gonna practice this, right? So we're teaching explicitly those skills in a recreational environment. Very, very small area. Right on the other side of that room is a toaster oven where we ostensibly are teaching students how to bake. And you'll see the remaining two pictures are really representative of the expansion of our Best Buddies programming here. So again, as a district, we are making sure that we are celebrating students from all backgrounds, despite the challenges inherent to some of our facilities and the limitations that we have. Again, punching above our weight. In terms of aspiration, I want to first and foremost draw your attention to the front center photo. How do we better do this? This is celebrating students who have a neurodiverse background, who are being honored at a county level from our community, due to nominations also from our community, and really, showcasing what we as a district have to offer in terms of a system for students of all backgrounds, and the courageous work that they do in really advocating for their children, advocating for their peers, and advocating for themselves. So this is, by the way, the Make a Difference Award, which we're at Springfield High School a couple 3 years ago. Would you say 3 weeks ago? Or,
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm phoning a friend. The left is the playground at Cades. If you get a chance to get over there, what I would say is when you differ that from this, it's not to say that, we are not making an effort to include students with physical impairments. This playground is designed around making the playground experience accessible, not just to students with physical disabilities, but actually like everything in that playground is actually meant to get interest from neurotypical peers. Because the ideal is not making it accessible according to ADA, but making it something where you have an authentic interaction between a student with a physical impairment and a neurotypical student, because they both want to be on the same device because it's cool, right? And that's kind of like what it means to be a child. And that's what we want to sort of strive for. The bottom right picture is a sort of a generic picture of another life skills program where, they have a recreational area, right? Like we've got a recreational area. They've got a recreational area. And we're really this is what an apartment, which is what we're teaching these skills explicitly to prepare you for. Well, like this is what an apartment kind of looks like in a lot of ways, right? And I think so that's a more authentic, more generalizable skill that we're trying to promote just by way of being in your neighborhood school. I'm done. I will take any questions, and I really appreciate this opportunity to showcase the work from my department and the amazing community participation. And I'm really blessed to have some of those participants here.
We'll start with Head Affairs team. Ms. Whitcutt, do you have any questions or comments?
I have one question. When I think you said it's a state rule that if a student stays until they're 22, they're considered a dropout? So does that mean they don't get a diploma?
Sorry, can I answer that right now? Okay,
Yeah.
no, they would. I'm gonna answer that in a couple ways. No, it doesn't. Yeah, I don't need to belabor. Typically, a student who is staying until the age of majority is in like a life skills program. They typically are among our more impaired students. They do get a diploma, and we typically refer to them as graduating on IEP goals anyway. Interestingly, and discouragingly, the state will take a student who stays even one extra year, and they are sort of coding it as a dropout. It doesn't mean that we deny them a diploma. We, bestow upon them all the rights afforded to any graduate of WSSD once they meet those requirements. But the state,
So they get to walk with their peers
Yeah.
and do the whole pomp and certain things?
yeah, and typically any student who stays, even when we have students who are staying 3 or 4 years beyond their 4-year cohort, they often elect to walk and participate in the graduation ceremony with their 4-year cohort, and they just stay.
Okay.
Mr. Lake?
Yeah, I had just a question about well, first of all, a comment. It's nice to see, and thank you for all the work, by the way. It was a lot of work. And I want to hear from the parents too that were part of it, but it was good to see that embracing neurodiversity was part of part of our initiatives. And so I wonder, I know that there were some, parent trainings and maybe staff trainings along those lines. Will there be additional PD targeted towards that? And is that kind of baked into what was already listed here, or?
I think so this is it's a broader conversation, and I welcome it. I think it's interesting. I don't know that everybody here has the same opinion. I can tell you first my opinion, and then I can tell you what we have planned, right? So my opinion is that while it's important to have, for instance, Down syndrome celebration day, in the year 2024, we need to do more than that. Every day should be Down syndrome appreciation day or acceptance day. The month of April is autism acceptance month, and that's great that it lasts a whole month, but really we need to make sure and do a better job of ensuring that in 2024, all students are included more meaningfully, and that we're not sort of tokenizing these holidays, for lack of a better word. And I think we do want to celebrate them within the context of cultural proficiency. So if we are celebrating Juneteenth, it makes sense that we also are honoring other holidays. In terms of professional development and parent engagement series, if that's, I think, what you were kind of mentioning. Yeah, I think there's more room to grow. I think we continue to offer and seek to expand upon offerings to parents that are not based on, does your child have an IEP? So for instance, kind of going back to, if we recognize, which we do from our data, that, school avoidance and anxiety are growing of concern. Well, that is very much like a Venn diagram where you need not have an IEP to be school avoidant. But if you are excessively school avoidant, the chances of you being referred and found eligible under OHI or emotional disturbance are higher. So these are offerings that we want to make sure that we are kind of offering universally. I would sing praises on my colleague, Dr. McCullough, has a extraordinary amount of parent engagement training offerings that are coming out of our office.
Thank you.
Sure.
No questions, Dr. Sember, but I did want to thank you for this presentation. I know you have to do it, but boiling it down so that a person who doesn't work in this field can understand it. I really appreciate even the language that you use. I was following, and it's such important work. You talk about 15% of our student population. That's 500 some students, really important. So, and that helps me understand what's happening student population. So thank you for the work. It was really good, really excellent presentation. I want to thank you for coming to. We don't often have people come to these meetings, and it's us talking to each other. So thanks.
And hi, thank you. Thank you for your presentation and your hard work again. I'm looking at some of our goals and where we need to do some work, and I have some questions. First, a little aside. Do you know what the 6-year graduation rate is? Because you know, I know the 4-year is missing all of those kids who decide to decline their diploma and stay with us. But more importantly, I think the 6-year graduation rate, to see how those kids, are they finally graduate? Are they truly dropouts? I think that's a more important number. And then, like, I'm not worried about kids not showing up for the PSSA. I know the state cares about it. I don't, I'm not an employee any longer, so I don't, but, and I know that we get dinged for that, but really, I understand why parents opt out. They're truly, my heart is with them. So, the other thing is I'm looking at some of our goals, and I'm very glad that we're embracing neurodiversity as a regular component. I also want to know how we're supporting teachers. I am still hearing from teachers on a regular basis that they are struggling with a diverse classroom. That when they have 24 students in a room and they have honors kids and then they have kids with, you know, specially designed instruction, that feels stressful to them. So if you could give us a little more specifics on how we can help not just train teachers, but allow teachers to redefine what success in their classroom is so that they feel good about it. I think their stress doesn't come from, oh, I have these kids. I think their stress comes from not defining, these are dedicated teachers, and I feel like they're not defining success well. So they feel like they're failing these kids. And I think that's really the root of it. And they want to do well, and they don't feel that they can. So I think they need to understand what doing well means for those kids. And if we could focus in that direction. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I don't have on the 6-year graduation rate data at my disposal now. I could look into that if just so I understand the question correctly. You are looking at when a student enters 9th grade, within 6 years, the percentage of, I'm gonna have to look into that and how I would get that.
PDE has it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll certainly look into that. I agree with you for what it's worth about TSSA participation. I also do feel and know from our other districts that we communicate with that you know, when that data was that snapshot of data, COVID, there was despite having heard the term give grace to students during COVID, districts were not afforded much by the state in terms of how it was measured, you know, for that. I really appreciate your comments in terms of how we, and it's going to broadly kind of categorize them as like how we are honoring neurodiversity within our schools. I also agree with you 100% that the vast majority, no one is seeking to inflict damage on students with disabilities that I'm aware of. Our teaching staff is extraordinarily dedicated, and I'm really right now talking particularly about kind of general education staff. You know, they want to meet the needs of an increasingly diverse population, and the ways in which we are maybe not hitting our objectives are not for lack of hard work. I think that it's a difficult problem, and the answer that I'm going to give to you right now is probably ultra simplistic. But what I would say is, and I've touched upon this a little with the presentation, is sort of good teaching is good teaching. And I think we are very accustomed to when we, and this is kind of broadly speaking in this context of like a neurodiverse population, is we need to dislodge ourselves from this idea that the neurodiverse population is a subset of our population, and kind of more look at it as like most of us, including in this room right now, whether we have an IEP, have ever had one or do not, we might self-describe, I know I would, as sort of like, you know, neurodiverse. I'm sort of I would self-describe that way. And that's not to sort of give short change to students who have IEPs, but I think we have to get sort of in the habit of kind of meeting the needs of sort of all students, irrespective of whether they have paperwork attached to that child. And I am continually surprised and impressed that when we talk to general education teachers and you say like, well, like this kid's struggling, I see that he's got a failing grade in your biology class or what have you. Like, have you thought of doing this. And they're like, well, he doesn't have an IP, I can't give him preferential seating. And you're like, well, you can, right? Like, why don't you try it? Like, well, like, what about scaffolded notes? Well, he doesn't have a 504 or an IEP. I'm like, but could you give like, what would it look like? And like, and I think the more we have those conversations, the more I actually feel optimistic walking away, that it's like, I think there are a lot of the barriers are sort of perceived, and they're sort of from another era, and we are kind of moving into this sort of, new era where I think, and again, this is sort of patting my department on the back a little bit, which is I really am a strong believer that the best interventions in this field of education arrive from special education. The best example I'll give to you is when we are talking about student with autism, and we say, well, there's a pragmatic language deficit, they need social skills. And then like, after now 40 years of research, like what are most districts doing? We're doing PBIS, we're doing the explicit instruction of social skills, not to students with autism alone, but to everyone, because it's very effective and the research has really like shown that. So I think the more we kind of move in that direction where we're saying these interventions, they don't just work for that one child. They really work for most of the students in here, and we don't need to make them contingent upon a student meeting some sort of, I'm going to use this word liberally, arbitrary requirement, because that's kind of what this is. It's sort of relative, right? Like when you have very, very high standards, again, it sort of makes that like relative discrepancy with students who have struggled look bigger. So I think the more we're able to sort of embrace just solid evidence-based teaching
Yep.
for all
Thank you.
students.
Thank you.
Sure.
And just one more comment is that the board really cares about the life skills program, and the board is going to work hard to make that work.
Thank you.
Yes. We were given the tour. Yes.
I lay it on thick, I know.
It's okay. It's good. All right. Ms. Holbert, do you have any questions?
I do have one quick question. I was just wondering, when you talk about out of district placements, does that also include students who might be going to the DCIU?
The IU hosts out of district placements. We also contract with the IU for a number of transition services, which, and I appreciate the comment too about like the commitment to sort of bolstering our facilities to sort of, so that we can do some of these things that we actually contract to the IU and pay money for with increasing capacity, over the years. I think that's also another selling point to investing in that infrastructure. But yes, it would include a student who goes to a program, a full-time program, a school that the IU runs. Sure.
I probably have 1,000 questions, so that I will not ask them tonight, and I'll engage over time to ask some of these. I think just one, I want to thank you also and the parents who've been part of this for helping us learn and understand what we need to prioritize on behalf of our students. And I echo the prior statement. I think the board was kind of surprised to understand what that life skills classroom looks like compared to what it is. So we'll take care of that. I love the work with parents in offering the executive functioning seminars and so forth. I wish that we had that when mine were a little bit younger. I did have, I think, the first piloting of some executive functioning curriculum at West happened with one of my students was part of that, one of my kids was part of that. I'd love to see, I'm not sure how broadly that has built out as something that is like part of the curriculum in the elementary school. I think it's fantastic for every single student, as you were saying, and who doesn't benefit from some of that. One other, I guess I was interested in understanding what do the general education staff identify as like the greatest need that they have? And maybe that's a really hard thing to answer, but if they were to say like this one thing you could do for us as a board to support you guys in that work, what would that be? And then the last thing is just curiosity. Like, do we collaborate in any way with probably we have to by regulation, but do we have partnerships in any way with employers in the region for employment post graduation for our students? That's a lot.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you a follow-up about this, the last question, because just to make sure I understand. The number one thing, I actually have, I don't think it's that complicated. I think unscientifically speaking, but I have a fair degree of confidence in answering that question. The number one thing that our general ed staff would cite in the broad area of difficulty that they're experiencing and accommodating students with exceptionalities is behavior. So concerns around behavior, we have a high number of personal care assistants, PCAs, one-to-ones. I think that is good, and it's an investment in our programming. I think that is not the answer. There is a very firm limit to the degree to which we can accommodate that financially speaking, but also, to an earlier point in the presentation, that, assigning a person to another person is not an authentic intervention, at least not in perpetuity. I think when we most readily employ that resource, it's when we say, the difference between this service and not this service is this student being able to stay in their neighborhood school. There's a moral imperative to it. That's when it's a very easy decision. But I think sometimes we as a system gravitate towards thinking that is sort of an answer for behavior in general, and I don't think it is, and I think our staff is certainly making a lot of headway in recognizing there are a lot of really, really rich approaches to addressing behavior and correctly identifying it that are far more potent. Your second question, and I apologize, I might ask you to rephrase it, but are we connected to do we have partnerships where we know what's happening to students post-graduation and their success?
In helping to set students and families up for success, and do we have like this giant food work collaboratively with us, for example, or other employers work, collaboratively with us?
Excellent question. We're blessed to have a transition coordinator at our high school whose job really is to kind of work through these services. We do have partnerships. This is a need, though. I mean, there are sort of expanding opportunities and opportunities for particularly in media where there's just like a large commercial hub, right? Where we have a lot of opportunities that we could expand on, particularly if we sort of assume oversight of some of these programs more than we currently are. So right now we are, somewhat at the mercy of the IU, does a fantastic job, and they themselves are expanding their community partnerships, but we certainly aspire to do more of that work ourselves.
Okay. Can I just follow up on that? Do you have a partnership with OVR, Office of Vocational Rehabilitation? Do they support the transition programming?
Yeah, so you're referring OVR typically for school age students sends a coordinator that we refer to that as an early reach coordinator. We not only partner with them and they attend IEP meetings for transitioning students, but we actually have a partnership with them where they come and present. We do an awesome transition parent night in the spring where we I think last I checked, we have a financial expert. Which is like when I was there, I can tell you I was taking notes for myself, like, oh, this sounds like a really great idea. But it also goes more into the nitty gritty of like establishing a trust, if that applies to you. And then, we have an OVR coordinator. We also have a student supports coordinator from, I think it was St. Joe's, don't quote me on that, where they're really talking about like, what do you do when you leave the system in public ed, which is an entitlement system, and go to a college or university, because many of our students are doing that. And how do you get these services? It's no longer an entitlement system. It's more about access. And we're now kind of moving towards like ADA and like, how do you don't get these things in the same way? And here are the first steps you do on day one when you pack into your dorm.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
That's important.
You go ahead with the community?
What? Go ahead. I was, but you can.
I'm curious where you say, we're 15% of our students have IEPs or especially design instruction, and 14.5% are African American or Black. Is that, am I reading that correctly?
For the 22-23 school year, to answer the first question, Ms. Wood said it was 14.9%, was the overall percentage of students in the district have IEPs. The second part of your question was the percentage. So if you look at down the bottom left of the sheet, I think you're looking at, the Black African American population makes 14.5% of the population in the district. And then to the right, that means that they are, they are 14.5% of the IEP population, but 6.6% of the student population. So they're twice as likely to be in special education.
And speaking of ethnic diversity and inclusion and equitable education, what is being put in place to get that number down? Because that's a big disparity between their white students and African American and Black. And we want to say that we have high standards, but how can you have high standards when you have a population of kids that could be misdiagnosed because they're African American? It's easy to say that they have ADHD or whatever, and the school psychologist does an examination, and then the parent is told that this is what the child has, and from lack of knowledge, they accept this diagnosis given from the school, and it stays with the child from elementary school to graduation. My son had Asperger's, and he had a PCA from 3rd grade until 12th grade. And none of the PCAs were given any training at all in what his IEP was, what his goals were, what their role was. So this PCA, they're just there to comfort the non-special ed teacher, to be like the behavior enforcer in the room for this kid. And I know that after a while, when it got to 10th and 11th and 12th grade, my son began to resent the fact that he had a PCA that was following him around, and that all the kids in his class knew that he was special ed because of this PCA following him around. And that's basically all they did, was follow him around. So, what is the commitment that you're putting forth for 2025 through 2027, if you say that's what your plan is? How do you begin to address that?
Thank you for that question. I'm gonna try to address everything that you stated, and if there's something I missed, please, I trust you'll let me know. I think you bring up some questions that or some parts of your question that are sort of more easily answered. But broadly speaking, you're asking very sort of deep questions. These problems and sort of the over-identification of minority students Black African-American students in this district is certainly not unique to our district. This is something that the Commonwealth has struggled with. There's a lot there to unpack. It goes to the testing bias that is inherent to how we are identifying students. And that's not to sort of let us off the hook. I think, some other thoughts that come to mind are how we are addressing behavior. And, so we have disabilities, right? Like there's less of an issue when we are talking about a student with autism or an intellectual disability or an orthopedic impairment. Those are a little bit more concrete. What you're talking about is really the majority of students who are identified, where it is very relative, where we're saying, this student's behavior is now problematic to this student's behavior is now a disability. And we cross that line through I think, not so much bad intention, but generally trying to solve these issues. I think that, we have an initiative right now to promote cultural proficiency, which is sort of like, how do I understand the behavior I see in the world? In my case, as a white man, and I use the word that behavior is inappropriate. Well, like inappropriate means a radically different thing to me, given my standing in the world and my background, than it does to literally anyone else in this room, I suspect. So sort of how does that bias sort of shape how I arrive at this work? So we can kind of move towards a system where we're not quantifying behavior as inappropriate at all, but we're instead like measuring that behavior and like what we're seeing. And that sort of makes it more objective. To your point about the PCAs, I find that very interesting, and I take that feedback. I think we certainly have, by necessity, relied more on BCBAs, board certified behavior analysts, who are really driving the programming, so that we certainly have work to do, but the PCAs that are working with students are collecting a lot of data. And really working on those fading goals and promoting greater independence. I take your point too about one of the things that's problematic with assigning a PCA at all is what we refer to as prompt dependence, right? If you have someone who's there assigned to you for 5-6 years, you develop a relationship with them that is kind of like the lines are blurry, right? And of course, it makes sense to me that a student's behavior might even be worsened as a result of having a relationship with this adult who they might resent when they're a 9th grader and they want to be sort of seen as a neurotypical child. And that really speaks to, this broader movement of how do we sort of destigmatize having an IEP? Kind of getting back to, I think, your original question, which is like, how do we identify at less of a rate? And there's no easy answer to that. I think, again, it's one of those things that depends. When we have reason to believe that there's a concern that warrants a referral, we are obligated by law, good or bad, to identify that student in a timely manner. So I think that sort of is at the heart of the problem, if you will, is sort of that child find obligation. I assure you, there's a lot that I said there, but I assure you, it's a multifaceted answer to a complex problem, but everything you said is correct.
Thank you, families, for being here. I appreciate all of your support of the district, your children, helping us become better at what we do. So I really thank you and for being here to do that. Do you have questions or comments you'd like to share with?
I do.
Yeah, great, thank you. Could you say,
My name is Karen Rischel, and I have a son who is 9. He's a 3rd grader at Wallingford Elementary School. He was featured in the photo there. He won the Making a Difference award for being a kindness captain. So he loves the principles of PBIS. He's safe, responsible, respectful, and at West helpful as well. He takes that to heart and helps to spread that around to other students of his. But not to sit here and brag about my son. I really want to actually thank Dr. Connolly and Dr. Sandberg for all the work that you've done over the last, since you've arrived, obviously, but, as the head of the neurodiverse education advocacy team, my partner here, Serene, and there were a few other parents, but they've since left the district. But regardless, we have a strong communication network of parents who are more and more active. And we're getting, there's a lot more activity in general with the administration, with the board, everybody's talking, and I'm seeing real changes, and I know you've got to be seeing them too. And I can only thank the administration for taking the time. We meet quarterly. You've listened. We've done many of the things we've asked for. The Best Buddies program was started. We have a lot of unified sports. Nicole's not here. Nicole, how do you say her last name? Anyway,
Latina.
there you go. Thank you. But there's going to be unified sports clinic in the grammar school at West coming up on the 25th or 28th. We have unified bocce. We have unified handball. It's a lot. Basketball. That's all been started. We're seeing more of the autism shirts that were worn at West. We need a more cohesive Autism Awareness Month message activities. And it's not just the tokenism. It's letting kids understand not to be afraid of these kids. I actually was at an event for Cinco de Mayo at an art center, and there was this little girl who had, I don't know what her disability was, but she had almost no control of her backbone. And she could flip this way and that way, and she was just there to celebrate like everybody else, Cinco de Mayo. But there was this little girl who didn't want to sit near her, and she kept staring at the little girl. And I just leaned in. I said, "It's okay, honey. She wants to learn just like you, and she's okay. She has a disability. She can't sit on her own. So she needs a little help, but she wants to learn just like you." And she shook her head. And next thing I know, she didn't look at that girl anymore. And sometimes these kids just need to understand that other kids are different. And I know they see it, but they don't know how to talk to these kids. Approach them, understand why they may have verbal tics or movement tics, and to not make fun of that, so there's more education that needs to be done. It isn't just like, hey, it's autism aware, acceptance month. And I think Wes has put on a few, if Gabe was here, Dr. Savage, he would say that there's been seminars to help bring that to light. So I think we need a little bit more of that. But again, I just want to say we're losing Dr. Conley, and I want to thank you for, I think you were only literally on the job a week or two when you met with us. And you had a lot of things to do, but you met with our team, and that really meant a lot to me and to our team. Now, one thing I want to say, you were mentioning about the teachers and how can we better support them, and it's the question Ian and I have too, is how much co-teaching is actually done with the special ed teachers and the general education teachers. Do they look at the curriculum together, and do they actually write modified education plans together for the different lessons? We've had an amazing year this year, we would say, with the team that my son has had. We have Mrs. Havel, who's like over a 20-year career veteran teaching, as well as Mrs. Bridget Scholar. And the two of them are like the same person. And they put out a note together, about things that Mrs. Havel's working on, and then the end would be probably maybe tailored because, Joe has an IEP. What is Mrs. Scala's working on? And, they have a big country report to do this year, and they're working together on how to make Joe successful and access this countrywide report that every kid has to do. And it's just been amazing. There's another great team, Dr. Kevin Stoller and Tara Irie. Again, two veteran teachers. Maybe these teachers could have a seminar to teach other teachers what works for them and what's been. I was a really squeaky wheel last year on multiple IEP meetings, and we have had one because the communication is seamless here, because the ability of these teachers to work so connectedly has been tremendous. And I would just like to see more of that. And I think that would, I know back in the beginning, there were bolded, non-bolded things that we could change. And there was something up there about not case rates, but staffing. I don't know, it's probably in the plan. You had to meticulously go through and say how many autistic support teachers do we have, for the amount of kids that are diagnosed with autism, and so on and so forth. And there are, sure, we're hitting the state mandated rates, because I don't know what the formula is, but you have to have so many autistic teachers for so many autistic kids. And, but do we need more support? Do we need another level of special ed teachers that don't have actual cases of kids, but then are, roaming the building and saying, how can I support you, teacher, with these sets of students who are having these difficulties? I don't know. I just think, I know it's money, it's more teaching, but I just think, you all may want to take a look at that in the plan, the actual numbers within the plan that's getting submitted to the state, and just making sure if we aren't, if we don't have as many teachers as our sibling districts, is there something a discussion we should have at finance committee to make that accommodation? And that's all I really have to say.
My name is Joanna McGowan. My son is almost 17 and he is more severe, so he is out of district. So I wanted to say thank you as well, because I really appreciate you including the parents. I know, like, there's over 500 kids with special needs. I've taken a lot of your time. We've had a lot of issues, so I can't imagine that, multiplying, and then we have a number of disabilities. So when you look at that broad range, and then even if you just look at autism, if you've heard it, the saying goes, if you've met one with autism, you've met one with autism. So just the needs in that group is so different. So this really is such a huge undertaking to corral all those needs together. And I understand, what an effort. We appreciate it, because I really feel like including us, but not only doing that, but really listening to what we have to say. And then I also just kind of want to echo what you have to say about the more staff and kind of maybe having people to step in where needed instead of a specific assignment, because if people feel they have that added support, it's investing on the front end rather than being reactive, losing those people, knowing that support is huge. And it matters to the kids. So the younger they are, and those goals, once they start meeting them, some kids can really have some of that support back. Mike Smith isn't one of them, unfortunately. He went through puberty and COVID, and he can't learn online. He's in his teen, he can't learn math, and so there are a lot of these issues. We trying to do OT on the internet with 2 other kids in 2 other schools, and it wasn't working. But there are a lot of kids that really thrive from that intense intervention going on, and then I'm just doing that.
Thank you. Are there any other parents? Yeah. Yeah.
I don't need you to go back to the slide, but in your initiative.
Could you, just for the record, because we have community members, could you give your name and street that you?
I
couldn't hear?
Road.
Thank you.
I don't need you to go back to the slide on the initiative, but evidence-based. Can you explain evidence-based versus research-based and why you use one over the other?
You want to use me as an example, Dr. Sandberg? Is that just making sure with you?
Yeah, take a stab at it.
No, that's okay. I tell him all the time, because this research, and I let him do.
Can I, so let me go, I think there was a couple questions too. I just want to make sure I'm gonna use the time while I'm answering the first question to think on your questions. But I will get to it, I promise. Karen, you asked about, sort of our co-teaching investment. I think that's, and I certainly have, folks up here who can talk about that as well. There's certainly been a lot of research, on sort of like the effectiveness and then the efficacy. Those are 2 different things, right? About, in terms of co-teaching, and it's sort of a mixed bag. I think like a traditional co-teaching model or a high fidelity co-teaching model And I think you kind of made reference to this, where it's like you've got two individuals who are both professional staff members, right? They're both teachers, and you don't know which one is the special education teacher, and you don't know which one is the general ed teacher. Like that's sort of a common sort of refrain that we hear about. Like that's evidence of a high fidelity model. And the reason that might be that way is because in theory, those two people are co-planning. They both have kind of equal expertise on the curriculum, and then in theory, they both have equal expertise on the SDI and the students' IEPs in their classroom, right? That is very rare. And again, it's sort of a mixed bag as to whether you're getting a lot of return on investment for that. We do have some of that. By and large, most co-teaching in this district that exists, where we're sort of privileged enough to even employ it, as well as most other districts, is more of a compromise where the sort of general ed teacher is sort of the curriculum expert, right? Like they know, if we're talking about a algebra class, like they know the algebra curriculum, they have expertise in delivering that curriculum. And then the special ed teacher, the special education teacher in that classroom is sort of an expert on differentiation. So they're going to really know the SDI of all the students inside and out. They might be taking a small group out to do a modified test. That kind of thing. And so there's like sort of anything in between. I think you're right that it's a numbers game. It would be at present a enormous financial investment to do sort of any increase in co-teaching. And again, are there other more practical things that we can put into place that might in the meantime kind of get actually a better return on our investment? I would argue from my experience, because I've been in districts that have really invested and doubled down on co-teaching, particularly this is common, that would occur when a district engages in a massive de-leveling or detracking initiative, where all of a sudden your classes are more heterogeneous in learning styles, and all too often we sort of throw in co-teaching as a band-aid approach. I would argue that can be effective, and I don't want to step on your toes, Dr. Pratt, but I would also say that it sometimes doesn't really empower particularly general ed teachers to learn what it means to teach a diverse classroom. So I think we really want to make sure that, and this was the second point that you brought up, that our special ed teachers, our special education teachers who are differentiation experts, are providing peer-to-peer PD, particularly our really good ones, and we have no shortage of really good ones, on like this, this is what it looks like to put this SDI in place. Like they're really providing a level of direct instruction to their peers. And I think some of that work is on the horizon. Again, I don't want to step on your toes with PLCs. I'll put that out there in the hopes that I can entice you all to come back for a future presentation to talk about that. But I think how we're more strategically pairing as a math teacher, as a special education teacher, you're a school counselor right now, like how are we meeting the needs of you, Karen, in a really like holistic manner, and sort of getting all our ground covered. So there certainly is room to invest in co-teaching. I don't know that it's the panacea that we wish it were. You also mentioned caseload, so I just want to cover that. Caseloads, there was not a slide on that. The state certainly has a caseload limit. For example, if you are a case manager for itinerant students, those are the students who are included for 80% or more of the day, and they are learning support, that's the program that they are in. Believe it or not, you can have 50 students on your caseload, which is astronomically high, if you ask my opinion. We are nowhere near that. And then you have, remarkably lower caseload allowances for a life skills program or an autistic support program, where if you're looking at supplemental autistic support, you can have 8 of those students on your caseload, which is far fewer than 50, right? So not surprisingly, our teachers who have autistic support caseloads are far closer to their max. And that is something that we keep an eye on for sure at all times.
What is it for learning support? We're not at 50, which is the allowable.
What's our average? It depends for building to building. I want to say we're at half of that, maybe, but it would depend. Okay, Sareen. So I don't know the difference between, to be honest, research-based versus evidence-based. What I would say is that we want to stay away from like and I'll lean to my counterpart on my left here, who maybe will provide a great segue for his portion of the presentation. But like when we were talking about like scientific method, like you can always disprove something. It's very difficult to like make to get from like, if we're talking about gravity, to go from like this is a theory to this is a law. That usually requires, I think, centuries. Don't quote me on that. I'm the special ed person, but it's not yeah. So you know, our reliance on evidence-based as opposed to proven is really what I try to get in terms of the semantics. You know, I do want to be clear, which is like, you know, the gold standard for like research is like a what would it be, a double-blind controlled study, like is generally impossible to implement in an educational setting, right? Like it's very difficult to say like I'm going to implement this intervention and I don't even know what this intervention is. Like you can run into a lot. So I think, you know, and this came up in the parent the community night, which I thought was like just really awesome and also just a testament to this community's like this is a really like a thinky community, like where like people are like, well, what about like if something has never undergone the scrutiny of peer-reviewed research, does that, are you willing to say that that means that it can, and you may have been one of these people, Serene, where like it's, yeah, right. And sorry, I hope I did the intonation correctly. And it's like, it's such a deep question and one that I was so ill prepared to answer. Like, I think I think that there are many interventions that we, you know, I think the big one that comes across my desk right now is like in when we're talking about executive functioning, we have a lot of speech language pathologists in the community who have very novel approaches in curricula, some of which are for sale. And there's nothing wrong with that. They are kind of drilling down on interventions that, in fact, many times are evidence-based, you know, saying that, and this is where it gets so complicated, is like this packaged thing that's for sale, this curriculum, nobody's ever studied that, so we don't really know. But like, let's tease it apart and dissect it and say like, oh, well, it involves explicit repetition of, you know, CVC words. Well, like that is evidence-based. We know that to be the case. So, you know, it requires a lot of like leaps of faith where we can kind of deduce that you know, but I just want to stress, and I'm sorry, Joanna, I see it's really not about research-based, it's about the evidence-based versus proven. Like we just have, there have been so many things that we used to regard as like, this is a slam dunk proven thing. And I think you, of all people, can really appreciate this, that like, not only like, are they, like an example, there are behavioral interventions that are very effective and also not ethical, right? And I know that's a topic that's near and dear to you. So like, it just gets very, very confusing in this work, as you can appreciate.
Yeah.
Joanna.
I was just gonna say that you and I had actually talked a little bit about that too, and part of it is maybe something is evidence-based and doesn't have as broad a reach, and it doesn't mean it's not effective for some kids. For example, my son's speech therapy didn't work, and finally, when he was 6, they started using the prompt method, which is motor speech, and that is the only thing that produces any speech, but ASHA doesn't really recognize it, and you know, it wasn't one of the interventions we could get covered in early intervention, but it's the only thing that works. And there's a number of kids, so I think kind of separating out subgroups, something might be much more effective than just a lot on that.
And we have one, I know you've been waiting.
Rob Rishel, Woodpress Room. I'm not a thinky type, so I'm gonna definitely. I first just want to say thanks to Dr. Sandberg. From an outsider, the process that he did with this involving the community is world class. Preparation, the education, the preliminary stuff. Just want the board to know this world class job. One thing I may suggest adding is we did the community, you did the teachers, and maybe a third step, bring subsets of those two together to help define it. Yeah. Last point I make is 15% right now. You have 3 years. I'll bet right now, anybody, the number's going to be up in the 3 years. It's going to go up in 6 years. It's not going to go down. That's what's going to happen what are you guys doing now to think ahead for that? I know you have a 3-year plan, but start thinking about year 5, year 6. I know it's a funding thing, a big issue, but, it's only gonna go up, so start thinking.
My, sorry, my husband, so I get that, why do you think it's good, just because of the rate of autism or?
I think the rate of recognition.
But at the same time, sorry, Dr. Sandberg, the universal design principles would like to, counterbalance. So I'm hoping for an even keel.
I'll bet. I think the system should be prepared.
Yeah, it's bankrupting the country, so.
Yeah,
we prepare them.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much for being here and your comments. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna turn it over to Mr. Benzing and K-8 Matt.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here. This is a bit of an overview of our process that we've had here for the last, I would say, full-blown year on a review of K-8 math resources across the district. The main wheelhouse for this was our math and vertical team. This is the group, I think, that was charged with initially taking a look at the overall structure, philosophy, and vision as a program K-12 for our district. And as a result of that, a number of wants, needs, hopes, and dreams came out of that. This is one of our fun sessions. A whole group of teachers, one of my favorite shots. It showed up a few edit fairs ago just because we literally have, you name it, we've got kindergarten teachers with principals, with math specialists, with high school teachers, and there's Dawn Denkin, a kindergarten teacher, saying, here's a model that could work for that. And watching high school teachers draw and drop. That same group, during the eclipse, pulled together. That was a fun day for us. We went out and saw the eclipse and then came in and had a math vertical team. And in terms of what was important to us, this is a direct result of both that group and reaching out to the general community about strengths for our WSSD program, what we hope for, not only maybe what we haven't reached necessarily, but one of the things we hope to continue. I think, this is public and we won't read through all of these. Our commitment to ensure students understand math rather than just regurgitate, the importance of mathematical skills and concepts and problem solving. And this last one's, important to me. And a little bit of this resonates, I think, with what Dr. Sandberg was just talking about, this idea of multiple strategies, arriving at answers with flexibility, being appreciative of the different methods, of course. I think that really, falls in line with the first part of our presentation. So these are some of our strengths. And in some instances, we looked at each other and said, maybe some areas we could build on. And I think this, after we finished this exercise, we looked at each other and said, we've been, looking through a resource for the last 12 years that we adopted initially before Pennsylvania standards were adopted. And we've been working so hard and we're in a good place, but we're also realize that there's a lot of product out there, a lot of information out there, a lot of research out there that we willing to consider and take a look at additional research. So that launched us. I will highlight this one since we talked about a lot today. Truly differentiating. It's an area that we really hope for in our new program. Not just taking a look at resources as add-ons, but the course of the actual core instruction. What are we doing to try to help? So that in mind, before we took a look at a single resource or listen to a particular vendor that often will bring us food, which is supply food on their part. It could be 4 to 5, sometimes 4 to 6. We thought we would get ourselves in line in terms of, you've seen this slide before. If there's something that drives Andy Benton, I think this is probably the slide. In terms of a look, not necessarily at when am I ever going to need this, an application, but mathematical practices that we think apply not just to math, quite frankly, but to anything they're going to do in their lives in the future. And some of these things I hope, resonate with you, the idea of reasoning abstractly, the ideas of, seeing patterns and rules and patterns, repeated things that happen over and over again. That is really important, I think, to mathematics. You heard me speak of these mathematical practices. So it turned, as we started to bring vendors in, we had all these lists, a list of non-negotiable things we hope for, these mathematical practices and the Pennsylvania standards, and we said to ourselves, has to fit in these. comes to us doesn't fit into these buckets. that I'm interested in. So armed with that kind of non-negotiable list, we brought forth the vendors and took a look at them. These are a lot of the philosophies that came out. Again, these things are posted in public and I've spoken to in the past. But these are that list of non-negotiables. The idea that we want our children constructed. You can think about some of the work in pathway to the strategic plan, putting students at the center of the learning. That came through here again as well. The idea of a low floor, high ceiling, right? If we're really going to have a truly heterogeneously grouped classroom, K through 8, K through 12, we want to have a point where every child in the room has. We also have a diverse population, where every child in the room that needs additional enrichment and challenge, that's there too. It's a tall order. It's a tall ask, but I think this is important to us as we move forward. So an overview of the general process. We went out and did a ton of research, talked to a lot of local districts, went to NCTM conferences, regional, local, state. You know, it's funny. It's kind of like when you do a search on the internet for a gift for your wife whose birthday was yesterday. That's true to me. And next thing you know, on the side margin are all these things that are resonating similar to what you were just searching for, and what in the world's going on here. So we made one call to one vendor. Next thing you know, my light was flashing for 2 weeks straight. I hear one, we're looking for a new program. Oh my goodness. So on paper, we took a look at these. On paper, we ran these through a third-party platform called Ed Reports. Super helpful. Takes a look at readability, takes a look at access, takes a look at our correlation standards. And they had to have passing marks. If we wanted to bring people in, it didn't have that match. Also, at least on paper, resources that were in line with those non-negotiables. And 6 different programs kind of check those boxes initially. When we brought them into this room, sometimes the library got too large and we heard their pitch. And we took a look at the resources and plowed through them and said, thank you very much, and on their way. And through that process, that trimmed down to 2. It trimmed down to 2 that we really dove deeply into. We paused at that point. They said, okay, so which one are we going to pick? I'm like, no, we're not. We're going to go slow here. So with those 2, we found districts in the area that had also moved to those 2 programs. We went and visited them. We talked to their teachers. We observed their classes. Interesting enough, both of those programs, both of those school districts had moved from math and focus to this particular program, which was the reason why I went and chose them. And then we went ahead and reached out to the vendors and said, thanks so much for your interest in us. We're interested in you, but we'd like you to fund our pilot. We'd like us to what? Yeah, we're going to try out your product for 3 months, and we want you to send us all the resources to do that. And they were happy to do that. Shocker enough, we asked sometimes to do it. So we ran this program, I don't know what the month is in there, somewhere in there.
February, March.
Thank you, February, March, Dr. Connolly, for 2 months, in different classes. A lot of times we had, 2 second grade classes run one, same team, same class, 2 second grade classes run the other. We compared notes, kicked around ideas, went back to those buildings we visited and said, we saw this. Did you find that as well? And said, yes, we did. We had to fix it. Which brings us to another point. None of these programs were perfect. And I think there's a push, publicly from people to say, what's the program you're using? And, anyone that makes that kind of a claim doesn't know what we are and what we do here. And that is make a place for every single child. In order to do that, sometimes you need to pull from different research. Not saying we don't have a full program or more technical philosophy or belief, but one said program isn't going to check our teachers and for this leadership team. So we move forward. We look to make a decision in March. That was a March in a week. They said we need another day. Oh, that's fine. But in the end, it turned out to be a unanimous decision for Reveal Mathematics, a program. I love some of these pictures. First, I have to show this to you. Sorry, that was a big unveil. There should have been a drum roll or something. But
Let's go back. Let's go back.
But we all go back. This is fabulous. This is our trip to Pottsgrove School District, and we saw a bunch of different classes. This is a first grade classroom, and we were in there observing they're breaking apart. How many different ways can they make 13? This is the class with the real lesson. And I was like, okay, we're going to take you to the next classroom. Like, oh my gosh, I lost the teacher. Where's Linda? And then all of a sudden I see Linda Gillespie on the floor with this student, working through this suitizing, and this student sharing with Linda. That's just like the poster. And I don't even see it. She has a typical Linda. This is a kindergarten teacher at SRS. So you can take WSSD teachers. I have WSSD, but they're still teachers. I know crawling around on the floor with this. This is one of our parent nights. This was one was at SRS, and these were well attended. We had, I don't know how many of these. Some of you all attended this. So there were 5 of them. 6 of them, some online, some in person. And this one I asked the rest of us funny because this is just my twisted humor after doing this for a year, I think. We finished it and said, okay, go take a look at some of the resources. And I had them split up by grade. And sure enough, the teachers, the parents all got up and went to the exact grade their child was in. It was perfect distribution. But you're gonna take your picture. It was enjoyable. So that's that show. And it's okay. So, Dr. Conley?
Yes. Drum roll, sorry.
After all of this, we landed on reveal mathematics, and I'll gladly say to you it was a unanimous decision at this
You
point.
want me to show?
Yes, if you don't mind, I brought some of those resources today with you, with me, just so you can kind of take a look at some of them. You'll see a mix of different things. Anything that has a spiral binder that the teacher would see. Thank you, Dr. Musikowski. You'll also see some hardbound consumable documents. That these are, so I've gone to the days of textbooks. You won't see a whole lot of textbooks around, but you will see a lot of consumable materials, especially for mathematics. We found it really important. I think for our teachers, as one of our wants and needs, we did not want them buried in an iPad and a Chromebook all day and everything. We wanted them pushing the pencil. So we want a digital component to it, but the primary core is their work and pushing of the pencil. And these resources for you to take a look at. Up here, you'll see an example of one of our launches. How are they the same or how are they different? You've heard me actually probably even run some of these in class. This is Marilyn Barrasa's work up in Canada. She started this, the idea of there's an answer for every one of these, and every child can get at least one. For a really bright child, I can say, I want you to get 3 out of 4. I want you to get 4 out of 4. So this is a K-8 adoption that I'm proposing for the board to consider at the end of the month at the board meeting. So this would be our core program for K-8, so a 9th grade adoption. When I started this, I won't show both, but I really wanted a K-12 program. It was just too brief. It was just, I'm too picky in terms of finding the perfect program all the way through. I feel content in that we got 9 out of 9 grades covered. But this is a nice example that you look at some materials. This is an Ignite. The idea is that to spark curiosity. The idea is that the power went out in this particular house. You have a candle, particular heights, and they're the big push also for real and multiple representation. So you have some verbal description here. You also have a table representation, and some of our students are just going to look at the table the whole time. And the question is, what do you notice? What do you want? Hermes works on that work. Annie Fetter, she does a lot of writing for New York Times and happens to live in Rutledge. Grade 6, chapter 7. One of the speakers that came to talk to Matt Vertical. Turns out, yeah, I think I told the story already once before, but we were kind of going through this, and I called Annie. I was like, Annie, we're really struggling. Everything I find I don't love. She's like, well, you know, this. I said, do you have any ideas? Well, how about reveal? How do you know that? Well, I'm a contributing author. Annie, when were you going to tell me this? Like, you came and spoke to I didn't want to bias anything. I think great. So, you know, one of the no, not math writers don't get. You know, this is an interesting approach here as you read this prompt. And one of the feedbacks we get often with math and focus was it's too language heavy. And I can appreciate that very much. But I also know that the context with which our children are often asked mathematical tasks is based in language. Now, there's language heavy, there's language excessive, and there's language to drive strategy. And I think this is an example. The question is not what's the answer here, right? You'll see this a lot in Reveal. What strategy would you use? How would you go about finding this? They still need to understand the implied operation here is addition. But how are you going to go about this? This is grade 2, 2nd grade, chapter 9, probably 2/3 of the way through the year. And you know, they'll rip through a bunch of different strategies that they can do here. This is, you know, to look at place value as you see them. Here, this is a wild one. Right? And by the way, I'm not going to do it. 423 plus 398. I don't know how you learn mathematics, but most people would stack them and go Berkeley, right? 8 and 3, add them up, 11, carry the grades to 1, 9 and 2, 11, grade to 1, 4, 12, add them up. Okay. Did anyone in the room consider the fact that 398 is darn close to 400? Yeah. Yeah, did you know? Excellent. Excellent. We could use you in here. If you're interested in a little extra time. I know school board members have lots of extra time.
Plus and minus 2 I can handle.
Yeah. But to take the sum of 400 and 423, that's 823. I had to borrow 2 to get that to 400 and 421. So, multiple strategies, as they stack them up and carry the one and add, still gonna be shared, we're still gonna talk about that. But it's not isolation. The whole point is to build meaning here. And then one of the mathematical practices that we showed earlier is this idea of efficiency, and people think that means often to do math quickly and accurately. No, efficiency means what's the best strategy given the numbers we have? And it might not necessarily make the consider 100. The numbers are far away from it. So sometimes I'm going to use that strategy. Not getting students the ability to make those discernments is important. I think this is a typical lesson. I've already shown you a few examples of launches, trying to get kids hooked. Informal experiences where kids are doing math, but they don't, and they're not taking formal notes. They're just experiencing the beauty and joy that is mathematics. I don't know why people are laughing. It's interesting. Here, explore and develop. This is kind of neat. The graphic's tough to read, but you'll see for every lesson in this book, and I have a better graphic of it a little bit later. Maybe I'll zip right to it. You will see there are kind of two options for our teachers, right? Choose your option, something that's more activity based, or something that is more guided exploration. Guided exploration is more teacher guided, as the context might allow. And there's also this idea of an activity based idea of when it's appropriate to move more towards a math workshop model. Those plans are there for the teachers. And in our pilot, what we found was, again, our teachers are kind of picky. They really have a particular way they vision these things. They dibbled back and forth. Right? They took a little bit of both. They said, it's great to have both of these. I kind of use a little bit of both. I was like, oh, okay. But more importantly, right, they can use what they haven't pulled out for the core instruction during an intervention time, during a CE time, during a little time after school. These resources we've been talking about. It's the first time pre-COVID where we wanted to take a look at intervention time. It's a must-have scheme. There's big plans in that direction. So that's this piece here: practice and reflect, assessment, and then one of the non-negotiables we were hoping for was differentiate. And I'll show you a slide a little later on the different differentiation there for any given. One thing that I like very much about this that I didn't put a slide in because this is a very comprehensive, robust. It does take a lot of data that we currently have. For example, our NWA map data takes that data that we have and pumps it into this system that give prescriptive diagnostics for our teachers to say, based on map data, assign this differentiation tool versus that differentiation tool versus this differentiation tool. We couple that with an exit ticket, which this program provides us. I've got 2 points we can start to look for. We get a third one, and all of a sudden we're triangulating some pretty specific resources. I'm going to keep going a little bit. Oh, this I can't stop. This is beautiful. The prompt here, again, what do you notice? What do you wonder? I think I'll cut right to this picture. We're in Pottsgrove again, and this prompt of we have 6 pieces of paper, and each card requires a fourth of a piece of paper. How many cards can you make? And the kids go off, and they're often writing in vertical, non-permanent writing surfaces. And this particular child had a little struggle, and just very, discreetly, the teacher slid over this pieces of green construction paper. He went right to the board, and can you see it? Started ripping. They're ripping the paper with the boards. And I said to the teacher, where did you get that strategy? And he said, well, it's in the book. It's right here in the book. Now, you'll notice how they ripped it in the book is different than how this child ripped it. But moments after this, there's 2 more slices he made here. He turned to me and he said, it's a bigger number. Why is he shocked? It's a bigger number because up until this point, right, 10 divided by 5, what happens to the answer? 20 divided by 4, what happens to the answer? 100 divided by 10, what happens to the answer? Let's get smaller. And here's one of the first times in 5th grade too. Here we have 6 divided by 4. The answer gets larger. He's like, it's getting bigger. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. The teacher's like, this happens a lot. You have to calm down. I'm like, for some reason, I was whisked out of the room shortly after that.
PCA.
Yeah, with a PCA. Oh, I know. No, I'm gonna keep going on this. These are some exit tickets here. These are things that we have had to create and generate. And, certainly through COVID, we worked our tails to make these exit tickets. They're all created here. This exit ticket can be one of our 3 points that we'll go ahead and pump in and build a protocol for. The beautiful part of this exit ticket at the end, and Dr. Connolly said, you should blow that up for them. And I said, I will, but I never did. You got me too many darn things, Dr. Connolly.
You're going to fill in an exit ticket before we leave.
Yeah, I'm going to fill in an exit ticket. But I love this last prompt that's on all of them. It says, how well do you understand it? And the last bullet all the way to the right says, well enough that I can teach someone. That's forcing younger students an opportunity to think about their own learning and how they understand. This is a shot, and some of you that have the teacher books, you can look up and find the differentiation page. We've got several different options here for reinforced understanding. This is just building proficiency. This is kind of on level. This is one thing our teachers really hope for. I'm not, sold one way or another, but they thought it was important. They had it in an older program, spiral review. They're taking a look back at some other things that they've done. And then here, extending our thinking. This is an area that we're really keen and want to keep an eye on because Method Focus did a lot of things. One thing it did really well was challenge our students. We want to keep doing it. So it's important to us that we build a program, and none of these programs were perfect. But if there's an area that we need to build up, we want to be ready for it. That's a lot of our work, I think, this summer that we're doing to try and prepare. Literally in this room 2 days ago, I met with the 7th grade team. We had the reveal resources out. We already planned out Unit 2. Take a look at Standards Aligned. Everything's now standard line. We're getting our curriculum documents in a row. We were a little behind Dr. Pratt, but we got our thinking was when we get a new program, we're going to roll this thing out and build in Desmos, the other pieces that are in there to have that ready for. So we're starting to build that. You know who's taking the lead on that for us too? She's being driven. Okay.
There's no behind. We are all exactly where we need to be.
I'm really glad you said
Exactly
that.
the right
Really, next time Dr. Connolly calls me into his office, but I'm gonna, we won't. Never mind. Anyway, I'll say there's no behind walls. But no,
Make sure you bring Dr. Pratt.
yeah. Curriculum grade level writing teams this summer, we have 19 teachers in counting. This is fluctuating a little bit. I think there's been some changes in circumstances for teachers that we're working through as a district. Across K to 8, we try to recruit 1 teacher per grade per building. So a team of 4, the 3 of them, and myself, the city elementary level. So 1 first grade SRS, 1 first grade ND, 1 first grade West, myself. At the same time, we do kind of the long range scope and sequence work for that particular year. That's our goal this summer. We've got 19 teachers committed to that work, which is great. We're trying PD a little differently with this. This PD by choice, I'm referencing it. And the idea is that we're giving them a number of different options to do this. There are in-person sessions, which we'd like all of them to have in 3 hours. We're offering 6 different dates for this. Some are at the end of this year, some at the start of next year, and some over the summer. And our flip-flops with sand and our shorts. Others are webinars that McGraw-Hill is providing that we're encouraging teachers to participate in, just kind of a refresher. They call it forget what they have a clever name. And then we have some things planned for next year, which I'm really excited about. In a moment, we're going to look at the proposal for this, and we baked into the proposal about, I forget the number, 15 professional development sessions into that proposal. We didn't want to keep that separate. We wanted to make sure it was included as the package. To one of my visits, we're going to have some of the contributing authors, or one of the contributing authors, come in the morning in October, and in the afternoon, look back at that differentiation page and make sure we're all in. And we're going to have our student services, our special ed folks in the room with us. I've named this one D-Cubed, differentiation deep dive. Particular favorite, D-Cubed, nice reference there. And the winter and spring, we have a follow-up. This one's not as well nailed down because I said I don't want to pick one. I want to see what's not working well, what we need to improve on, something we need you to come back and help us with, and we're going to customize that. And then they have a getting digi with it. That's their code, not mine. In the afternoon, where we're really going to go through the digital component of this. And one thing I want you to know, because I know there's some concern, I think, for teacher overload on this, and I very much appreciate it and hear it often, that again, this is a very comprehensive program. We will not be able, so we're asking for a bit of grace from the community and the public, to implement all aspects of this program on day 1. We will not be able to implement all aspects of this program after year 1. So my expectation of the teachers is that they get accustomed to the instruction, the resources as a PDF, and then as teachers come to me and say, I'm ready to look at this, I'll say, great, here we go. Now, I'm ready to look at this, great, here we go. And we'll grow grass roots. In year 2, armed with this getting ditchy with it, which will be in the spring, we'll say, okay, next year now, we want to use that triangulation to pull it together. And then the year after that, we'll add another one. So this is a bit of a commitment on our part, but I think in order to keep everyone on the same page, it's important we're considerate of everyone's bandwidth.
The trademark though, P3 and
Yeah, very good, very good. I have lots of ideas, and people laugh at them, but they never pay me for them. Yeah, they laugh, but they never pay. So it's a 5-year contract cost proposal. This has been in front of the board a number of different times. This is at Facilities and Finance. I visited earlier this month. The 5-year contract is I'd say middle of the road par for the course. They initially pitched a 7-year for us, 3-year, a 1-year, a 5-year. And we landed on here, I think, just because the cost per year came down to the point where it's a little more reasonable. There's big drops, you know, if you go from a 1-year, it's $100,000 more per year versus if you go to a 3-year, then there's a $20,000 per year drop to here. So again, as you look at this number, you know, $75,000, let's call it per year. I want you to keep in mind that's a cost for 9 grades of core math instruction for every student in the Wallingford-Swarthmore School District. In terms of cost and keeping in mind too, currently we're spending for consumable math and focus workbooks roughly, I would say $15,000 per school, not including all the digital components that are coming in. So it adds up in this regard. Yeah. I think that, yeah, there we have it. So that is the presentation I have for Reveal Mathematics and the journey it took us to get there, 1 year and 2 months now. I brought some materials here for everyone, you know, feel free to look at them, but once the mic cuts off, we can certainly talk more. I can go through a little more detail, but if anyone has questions now for me,
Ms.
Ms.
Woodman?
Mikowski, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Do you have a question or comment?
No, I have a comment. Great work. It shows that we have an exemplary, administrative team that is really student and I think that you are committed to the success of every child. And this program is a good example of it.
Thanks for the good saying. I just want to remind you that this is the case, I think, with what we do think, how we do things here in this district, at least as long as I've been here 20 years, that we've always tried to get everyone at the table, try to get the teachers and the students from representatives from student services, principals, all in the room when we were having those discussions. So, you know, thank you for the credit, but I think that math vertical team and that group had such a good time. Like, we got to keep doing this after. I'm like, oh man, I got other things to do, but okay, we'll keep going. Just to continue the practice of the work and the research. So
Well, I meant also thank you to your team.
oh, yeah.
I know that you can't, behind every good leader is a better team.
Yeah, you're not kidding. Thank you.
Mr. Lake?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, you know, this was such a thoughtful, thorough approach to this process. And I think it really instills confidence in the materials that we're selecting here. And so, you know, I doubt that there would be buyer remorse at the end of this because of the work that you put in. But at what point do you think, I mean, and I also appreciate the way you broke down the costs when you put it into perspective. Yeah, the big price tag it's big, but when you put it into perspective, it's really not necessarily when you look over the span. But at what point do you think that we can look back and say, hey, this is a great, I'm glad we chose this resource? What, you know, like how far into it do you think?
Yeah.
A year, 2 years, or?
I'd like to think at the end of year 2, and this is funny, we had an interesting conversation the other day about math data, right? And the representative came to us and said, we're changing things on the map. We want to know if you want to opt into the new changes or not. There's going to be some changes in measures. And then, well, I have no interest in changing the measure. There's a time I want to keep the measures identical. It's right now for the next 2 years. And my hope is that I feel like there's a real yearning by our teachers to try to answer the call that we keep hearing about this differentiation. When we pressed a little, they've said, we need the resources, the time to do that. We're trying to answer that call. So my hope is, since there's such a yearning for this, in a year or two, year 1 is going to be a challenge for us. You know, you'll see me with a cup of coffee here at these meetings, I think, next year. But year 2, we're going to get everybody. We're going to go. We saw a little bit of that in the ALA, I think. What you said after Dr. Mosikowski, that
Yes.
year 1 and that initial pilot, but now I don't take it. We got it in year 2.
You use the right word, which is grace. We have to give grace to our teachers to get used to any program that is implemented in the first year. And we see this every time there is a new program. It's new to them. It's new. They have the expertise and the ability to implement these programs in the classroom, but they also need the time. And to get you, like any one of us, We get a new piece of equipment in our kitchen. We know how to cook, but we still need to get used to that appliance. It's the same way. And our teachers are willing, and I think we see this all the time. They are willing, they are able, and they are passionate about it. They're excited to have these new resources because they are part of the process.
I would consider, one metric is certainly the math. One metric that I have a keen eye on as well are the number of our students that are involved in the core regular education requirement stays and actually increases, that we don't have students pull out in our top 5 special ed teachers or out of regular ed classrooms. But that number starts to diminish more and more and more each year. If your students get pulled out for math instruction, I had on 4 teacher, even though they're learning math and focus like I'd like to see that population evaporate. We'll see. That's the number we have in mind.
Mr. Henry?
Yeah, I also wanted to thank you, Mr. Benton, you and the vertical team, all the teachers that did already a year and a half, 2 years worth of work, it's a lot of work. Thank you. So thank you all that. And a couple questions regarding the new program. I think, do you offhand how long math and focus we had using that? 10 years?
2012 is in my head.
I think I remember when
2012, 2013. The copyright 2013, we were very early in it. And the new math standards came out 2014. We all kind of laughed and said, we just about the standards just changed.
So
2012, 2013.
Okay, so quite a while. So I'm assuming that the reason we're looking at a new program is that program is updated and the deficiencies in that. So I'm going to ask the obvious question. You chose reveal math because it is addressing those deficiencies. Is that correct? Is that an easy answer?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's easy. So for me, there were 2 hopes I had coming out of this. One was that we would have the differentiation tools in place to support all learners. I think it does that well. And 2, that we would have an informality, I think, to the mathematics. That would be more experiential.
Okay.
That we would have, because it's hard for teachers, especially at the elementary level, when they're responsible for all of those courses, to try to make meaningful mathematical experiences that aren't, I do, we do, you do.
Sure.
Want it to be an opportunity for them to play, and that built into the program. And this had both.
Right. I think is what I've, as a parent that's come out of my mouth over the years is why in the heck are we changing this program that I just finally figured out? The parents are going to say the exact same thing. So I'm just going to say it because you're ready with the answers, right? And the other thing that I said as a parent with math and focus years ago, I think was I couldn't help my kid after 4th grade probably do any math. I didn't know how to do it. So I know I'm not the only one. So I'm wondering, so my question, and this is a little bit more difficult question, is there a way to get the parents more comfortable with a new program? They don't have to know all the ins and outs, but more comfortable.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And there will be a little bit of that. I mean, I think I pulled this up. I talked to Colin Booker. This is one of those, what do you notice, what do you wonders? And to someone at home that pulled this out, they might say, I gotta write Benzing an email, like, what are you doing in here? But this is something, the more our students have this experience, I think the more they'll glean from it. Like, this is 6 divided by 4 is what they're setting them up for here. And I think, to answer your question directly, we did this with Math and Focus. We had these parent nights, these math nights, that we open up and invite people in to kind of have these experiences. But that's our intent to do it as well. I want to get the teachers' feet on the ground. I'm thinking Thanksgiving-ish.
Okay.
Next year, we have another round where we go to each of the schools, and a little different this time. Before it was just me. There'll be tables set up, different grades, people can rotate through and experience the math. There are also kind of community family videos that portray what's happening, how it works, what it would look like. And that we envision, pushing those out through Seesaw or Schoology or in those community blasts to our parents as well, periodically throughout the year. So we can access.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thanks, Mary Jo. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So first, I'm going to compliment Dr. Maskowski about reminding me about giving teachers grace. And I appreciate that because I know that elementary, boy, they're getting lots of new things. This isn't the only thing.
Right.
This is, right? They're going to get, yes, right? All of it. So it's a lot on teachers right now. So yes, I'm reminding us to also give grace to the teachers when we're looking at math data or any of that, just to see, that this is going to take a little bit to implement and understand that. So I appreciate that. I think you've done good work. I feel because of your process, I haven't spent, I got to look at it a little bit, but I haven't, delved into it. And I'm saying that because of your process, just what you said, Ms. Woods, that your process gives us confidence. So I think that is, I very appreciate it. Thank you. That's all I have. Ms. Olbert?
Thank you.
Ms. Martin?
I'm looking at the fourth grade, practice book, and I just love it. Like, I think I would have maybe actually done better in math. I know, right? No, but it's awesome. Like, explain in pictures or words or numbers, your reasoning. It gives you so many different ways to be able to come at the problem. There's not one example of two trains moving in different directions. But they're super like accessible, how many paintbrushes or how many strawberries and things like, the books on the book or bookshelves in a bookstore. It's so accessible. Yeah, I'm really excited about this. I really am. So thank you very much. And thank you to all the teachers that spent a lot of time.
And you know what else? It's not real wordy. It's not those word problems that you wanted. Like I used to always say in IEP, are you teaching English or are you teaching math? Because you can't do both. Like my child can't do both. He can't read and comprehend and pull out the math problem. And I'm like, just pull out the numbers. It's like n plus 2 is 12. No, that's not how I'm supposed to do it. I don't know. From third grade on, I couldn't help it. I kept saying I need like math for dummies or something. So I was just looking through the student edition and I noticed that it's not real wordy. And that's a different approach to math, I think. And I'm happy that as a district, we're taking this on. I think that our math scores will go up.
I just want to say, don't forget the train problems are on the field. Don't ask how I know. Our family?
Yeah, it's a quick one. I'm just curious if on the financials, you're paying an old curriculum and I'm paying this, what's incremental? You don't have to tell me that, but if you track that, what's the incremental increase? And then what tangibly are you expecting as a result after? I know you said, hey, we hope math scores go up and all that. Are you setting any goals for those to say, you know what, we expect that, here's where we're at, it's gonna go up 10%, whatever the number is. Once you're mature, any thought of that? And then last question, any contingencies to say, I gotta pull the plug here, what conditions would that?
Sure. I can maybe speak for the group and say that the gentleman at the end of the table, who's usually here at every meeting, has very specific goals and targets for us to hit for a very particular population. So let there be no question that isn't in place for me. The timeline when I would like that to happen is as soon as possible, but I think I've shared, here at the end of year 2, I think is a point where we can really look and say, okay, the program is more or less on its feet. We're going to continue to refine it. But now we really see what our medal is here. Ideally, what I like to say is after a child's gone through the whole program, how they done, but the reality is we don't have that I don't have that time for it to me by the people that support me, I would say. So we're working through it. In terms of cost, the model changes a little bit. I think we have an upfront cost here that we've laid out that's going to carry us to the next 5 years. The management focus model is a little different just because we had it so long. We moved to almost like a year-to-year cost. So we're trying to make that work in terms of how that works. We're reallocating that cost. And that's largely done by the talents in the business office. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to put it into words though. So that, okay, in the workbook, I saw there's a section, additional resources, it says vocabulary. will the teachers actually have the time to take the time to review that vocabulary with the students and do some of the projects that are recommended? Or will they just, because that is so very important, especially in kids who have that language, deficit already coming at them. So I'm already, I'm just looking at language for math. Students may encounter terms like, I may not even say this right. Minuend, subtrahend, minuend, the subtrahend is the amount subtracted, minuend, subtrahend equals difference. That's fourth grade. My son's gonna be learning that next year. I never heard those terms before. So I'm already concerned. I'm gonna need a dummy for me book, maybe a textbook sent home with me so I can supplement his learning. Schoolology videos. I'm serious, because that's what we do and have been doing to make him as successful as he's been. And I'm already, like, I've never heard those terms before. And he has struggled inferencing, so being curious, there's a lot of curiosity baked in here and have abstract thinking and reasoning. He may give the most ludicrous answers to something he may not even get to where you're trying to lead this child. And so I'm not seeing, like, there's a section for English language learners and how you can like scaffold it and everything. So maybe the teachers will use a combination of that with whatever to help differentiate to these kids that have like language deficits. And I don't mean to be negative, Nellie, but I'm scared right now. I mean, this, there's gonna be a lot of manipulatives, which is great, hands-on, that helps, visual. But there's also gotta be a lot of stations and working together with classmates, and that doesn't come easy either with kids that, because they get overlooked, they might not have the voice, so how actively are they participating in these workstations? And then how will those groups be built? Are they gonna be heterogeneous, like are we gonna have, like all the kids that have special needs working in a group together? I hope not, you know what I mean, so that they can, so I don't. Maybe you and I can set up a meeting, because I'm sorry, I wasn't able to meet, not that, Karen Rishel show, but I wasn't able to make the meetings, and now I need to.
I understand.
But, I just, so will there be anything coming home, number one, to Mr. Henry's point, because the program we're in now has something school folk math, something comes home, a packet comes home at the beginning of every lesson. And it does have the vocabulary, and it does show you how the kids are gonna arrive to their answers. And that's how I've been helping them try to do the third grade math I can't do. So I need that, however, whatever form it comes in.
Sure. The good news is, as I said before, that it's a comprehensive program. There's community releases similar that we experienced with Math in Focus. In terms of the vocabulary, that's one thing we're really interested in, kind of seeing how this develops.
Yeah.
One point of focus we got from Postgrove that moved from Math in Focus to Reveal
Yeah.
was that they had shared with us that that's one area that we had a little, the vocabulary is not one-to-one. It's a little different in terms of what's asked of them. So everyone handles that a little differently whenever there's a change in the program.
Yeah.
I know Pottsgrove starts with unit 0 every time. They try to cover those main differences prior to launching. Our philosophy is gonna be a little different. We're gonna try to mix that in a little bit throughout, because we spend a unit 0 on it. That's a long amount of time where we're just talking about the differences in program. We want them to experience that. To your point about, inference, I think I firmly believe that's something, a skill that we can build in our children, even those that are, neurodiverse. And that one of the main driving mechanisms behind what do you notice, what do you wonder, is that no answer, as you said, is absolutely ludicrous and absurd and going nowhere. Every answer leads us to something. It's a curiosity a child had, and it's a possible avenue we could take. What greater lesson for us to put in the class with students with all learn at different rates, levels, and abilities. So encourage your son to let it rip, because we're ready to hear it. We want to act on it. The vocabulary, we have veteran teachers. I think too, that when they look at and hear some of those words, they're going to realize this isn't in our standards. This is a target maybe for this book. We're going to find a middle ground. So we're still going to use words like subtract and difference.
Well, you'll like
rest assured.
Mother's Day project that came home, and one of the questions is, who do you love more than your mother? And he said Einstein. I don't know how he came up with that, but
Not bad. I don't know, you're claiming he had ludicrous answers. Sounds pretty good.
Should've been that.
Yeah, it's okay.
That's your nickname, Rob.
Maybe you're on. There's a reason Father's Day second. I get it. I don't know, go ahead.
I also just share one other thing that might give some peace of mind when we think about the vocabulary and that kind of language load from students from, you know, third grade to fifth grade, all the way up to AP literature and AP language. There are very specific pieces of terminology. And so on any given day, if I ask, you know, an AP student to describe Zugma on the spot, that would be really hard for somebody to do. And so like the idea of using one verb in two ways simultaneously. She stole my heart and my car. Same verb, one is used idiomatically, one is used literally. And so like there's a name for that. And as an upper level teacher, as well as somebody working with young students in a middle school or in an elementary school, when we describe to students that a literary term or a mathematical term is a shorthanded way of describing a phenomenon, and if you don't have that word right on the tip of your tongue, you can still describe that phenomenon longhand. If I blanked on the word Zugma, I can describe, oh, this is using I noticed that a verb is being used in two different ways, and we get to the same result. So as Mr. Benzing is talking about a practices point of view, if you happen to know the term, awesome. If you blank on the term and you can describe your noticing and wondering, that's going to be an okay space to enter it as well. And Mr. Benzing talks all the time about what it means to have experience before formality. Like the formality is, oh, what you just described has a name. And so I think when we are shifting to that practices mindset across literacy and across math, it can give us like that, like take a breath moment that if we find ourselves kind of tripped up on a particular piece of vocabulary, we can give ourselves that grace to say, oh, I have another way. I can describe the phenomenon longhand as well. So.
And
Another question?
say something else?
9:15.
I know, sorry.
No.
With this being a new program and parents being concerned about it, it's moving in the right direction. That every child matters. And the inclusiveness of the district. And so parents have to, because we have a community that parents are teachers, have been here, so they know the math.
Yeah.
And so they don't want to try something new because they're comfortable. But sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone to explore new options and ways of doing things. So I think if we take that mindset like together on that walk, that we're going to experience this as a new learning journey, and that there will be grace but there will also be times when Mr. Benzing will take all your emails.
Thank you.
You got any resources here for us to look through, they're gonna stay in the room, I'm happy to stay after with them as well, answer any questions, good for the listeners, but
Great, so June is coming up, our June meeting, we have two topics, current research on homework. And the plan, and then our professional learning priorities for the 24-25 school year. It is June 11th, it is our last meeting of the school year, so we hope everybody can attend.
We're having a pizza party.
That sounds great, Dr. Marseille is gonna buy pizza for us. So, have a good night, everyone, thank you.
Thank you.